and welcome to SCVO's Building Scotland's Wellbeing Economy webinar. My name is Susan Smith and I'm Editor of News Services at the Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations. And the moment I'm leading on the Never More Needed campaign in Scotland. Never More Needed is a UK-wide campaign which aims to raise awareness of all the great work that the third sector is doing in response to COVID and debate what the future might hold for the voluntary sector. I'd like to welcome our panellists. We have Ben Macpherson MSP, the Minister for Public Finance and Migration, Katherine Trebeck, Advocacy and Influencing Lead at the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, and Anna Fowley, Chief Executive of the Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations. Before we officially kick off, I've just got a little bit of housekeeping. Just to let you know, all webinar participant lines will be muted throughout the webinar. You can chat in the chat function, and if you want to ask a question of the panellists, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screens. We've had quite a lot of questions submitted in advance, so we won't get through all the questions. So if you see a question in the Q&A section you really like, please upvote it and we'll try and get the most popular questions asked as we go through. There's also going to be a couple of polls running through the webinar, so keep an eye out for those and please answer them quite promptly so that we can include the results of those in our discussion. And this webinar is being recorded and it will be available on the SCVO website afterwards for you to view again, should you enjoy it so much, or share with colleagues. Okay, I'm now going to ask the Minister, Katherine and Anna, to speak for a few minutes on the theme of what is a wellbeing economy and where is Scotland on the journey to realising it. So we'll start off with the Minister, Ben Macpherson.
Thank you very much and a very good afternoon to you all, and really grateful to be taking part in this important discussion. As I hope you'll all be aware from the emphasis we've placed as a government in recent years, but particularly in recent months and weeks, we are of course working to deliver a wellbeing economy for Scotland in general terms, but particularly as we recover from the COVID-19 crisis. And of course, building a wellbeing economy is a complex and multi-dimensional challenge for us all, with balancing social, environmental, economic and other spheres. And in doing so, building, importantly, a society that thrives and delivers increased quality of life in a sustainable manner and for the benefit of as many people as possible, and in all of our aspirations, the benefit of everyone. And that is why in the Scottish Government, you'll know that we have moved beyond simply focusing on headline economic measures of success like GDP to look at wider determinants of well-being. Our National Performance Framework brings together the indicators that we use to chart Scotland's progress as a country, from life expectancy and unemployment to economic productivity and other aspects like community land ownership. Now that COVID-19 has negatively impacted the well-being of people through many channels, and of course we all need to be aware of that, it has also endangered our ability to generate future well-being through forced school closures, business indebtedness, the loss of skills for some and redundancies for others, and many more challenges coming at us. But at the same time, these difficult months and the months ahead have highlighted the importance of social capital and networks of support, and how we together as a society consider where we go next in terms of building that fairness and that justice at the heart of our society. And of course, the voluntary sector has played such a crucial role within this, supporting the health and well-being of people across Scotland, our places and our communities. And I have seen that firsthand in my capacity as a constituency MSP and emphasise it strongly. The third sector have been crucial in dealing with the initial shock and will remain crucial in the months ahead. And the Never More Needed campaign rings very true in that regard. This hasn't come without its challenges, and we have moved fast to support the sector, and particularly my colleague Aileen Campbell. The Third Sector Resilience Fund, as you'll know, has invested 22 million so far and is focused on the immediate cash flow challenge facing organisations, and these quick actions have saved an estimated 15,000 jobs and helped hundreds of organisations to survive. And as we tentatively emerge from lockdown, we in the Scottish Government also understand the support required has changed, and the announced 25 million Third Sector and Community Recovery Programme aims to support you in moving forward into the recovery phase and adapting to the challenges of COVID. Our wider response to COVID-19 and economic recovery has moved from the immediate reaction of thinking and acting on the economy, thinking and acting in the immediate to respond to what sort of economy do we want out of this crisis. And we have set out our vision to build a wellbeing economy in our response to the advisory group on economic recovery, and have also taken some very significant policy steps in the programme for government published just a couple of weeks back. The programme for government includes policies to deliver on three objectives. Firstly, a national mission to create jobs, good jobs and green jobs, protecting people from redundancy and unemployment, and investing in our Green New Deal. We have already provided a comprehensive package of 2.3 billion for businesses and individuals over the last months, including 11 million through our newly self-employed hardship fund. And we have set the first tranche of our 2 billion low carbon fund, including creating 100 million for our Green Jobs Fund, investing alongside businesses and organisations to support new and increased opportunities for green job creation. And as was made clear in the Programme for Government announcement, we will invest 1.6 billion over the next Parliament for heat and energy efficiency, reducing emissions, tackling fuel poverty, and creating good jobs in the round. Secondly, we're also focused on lifelong health and well-being. So that's suppressing the virus, obviously, remobilising and reforming the NHS and social care, and tackling health inequalities. We'll put a clear focus on mental health and well-being and the specific impacts the virus has had on existing health inequalities and tackling that. And we will also establish and have established an independent review to reform adult social care, including consideration of a national care service. Thirdly, lastly, promoting equality and human rights is key to our agenda, and helping our young people grasp their potential. Renewing our efforts to make Scotland the best place in the world to grow up. So our new 60 million youth guarantee will see every young person guaranteed an opportunity in education, a job or training, backed by additional funding for apprentices, apprenticeships, and the new Job Start payment. And we will also deliver a revolution in child rights, incorporating the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child and keeping the promise to care experienced young people. But delivering on our ambitions for wellbeing economy and a just transition in Scotland also starts at a local community level, rethinking how we live, work, learn and shop. And just briefly, I just want to say a little bit about community wealth building and the work we're doing there. Ensuring local people and businesses have a genuine stake in producing, owning and enjoying the wealth they create. In local economies, we are working to expand community wealth building. This recognises the importance of ownership models and the promotion of co-ops, third sector organisations, and the role of local authorities, and how together they can have an effect in influencing this through procurement and other tools. The local or anchor institutions, whether public, private or third sector, are very important to the areas they are located in, and given the large amount of investment they oversee, how they choose to purchase, employ and invest in their communities really matters. So community wealth building provides a framework to increase and maximise the impact of public sector spend, staying local to create and secure more local well-paid jobs and broader community impact. And it also values democratic models of ownership like cooperatives or voluntary organisations. And the third sector, of course, has a very important role to play in community wealth building and implementing a wellbeing society, as do continued investment in housing. And of course, we committed to continuing our target of 50,000 affordable homes and also digital inclusion and we emphasised in our programme for government investment and continued development of our Connecting Scotland campaign and initiatives. But in summary, because I want to get into the discussion and hearing from everyone, I would say that crucially building a wellbeing economy, like achieving progress towards our national performance framework, and that's our collective national performance framework as well as Scottish Government's, is not just a task for government. Government policy only has a partial influence in many of these indicators, and of course in Scotland the power of government is somewhat constrained by the devolution settlement, and that key aspects for change like employment law and other matters, power resides elsewhere. But that doesn't dampen our determination to do all that we can and our commitment to that. But for us to be successful, to build a wellbeing economy needs a whole Scotland effort, and we have a huge opportunity out of this crisis to create that collective determination and to bring it together with focus and drive. And this is why I'm so happy to be here today, because the third sector's involvement is crucial, and voluntary organisations are extremely well positioned to support this transition towards a wellbeing economy and to help lead it. So looking beyond economic benefit and prioritising wider social and environmental impacts and quality of life is central to your ethos, and it should be central to all of our ethos as we move into this next phase and to building back better. So you all set an example that can help inspire all of us in government and the wider business community and society as a whole. And I really look forward to an enriching and important discussion this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. That would suggest that we are somewhere on the journey to creating a wellbeing economy in Scotland. The Scottish Government is obviously putting a lot of emphasis on this at the moment, more so than other parts of the UK and many other governments. Katherine, do you find that heartening? Do you think we are on the journey?
I think Scotland is better than where it used to be, and better than many other countries, but that by no means means that's good enough, or that we can take our eyes off or relax and think we're sorted. And actually there's a lovely phrase from the sociologist Zygmunt Bauman, who says a good society is one that knows it's not yet good enough. And I think if that mentality drives Scotland to keep looking further and keep raising its gaze and keep thinking, how can we do better, then we'll be well on our way to really embracing the wellbeing economy agenda, which in its most simplest is about social justice on a healthy planet and reconfiguring, redesigning the economic system in service of those higher order goals. And that actually is a profound shift in how we currently understand and think about the economy. We currently put the economy on a par with other goals. You can see that often with diagrams in the Scottish Government. Even the purpose of the NPF still talks about one of the purpose targets being sustainable economic growth. And I think we have to ask why, what is that for, and start being fair weather friends of economic growth rather than its ever faithful followers, and create more of what we need to deliver good lives for communities, rather than just thinking it's as easy as growing the economy as measured by GDP and keeping our fingers crossed that that will trickle down to communities that desperately need it, and keeping our fingers crossed that that won't exacerbate massive climate breakdown and environmental destruction. And so we need to reposition and recognise that the economy is in service of those higher order goals. It's not an objective in and of itself. It's not good enough. We need to really think about what sort of economic system will deliver those goals and get out of, I think, this stuck mindset that countries like Scotland, the UK, and so many other social democracies have been in over the last few decades, where it's been, I talk about the three-step process, where the agenda has been grow the economy faster, but turn a blind eye to the collateral damage on communities and on the planet. And then step two is sequester a little bit of tax with all the machinations and the political manoeuvring that requires. And then step three is deploy that tax to patch up the damage of step one. And we see that in our sector. We've been trained to celebrate a tiny little increase in benefit payments, or a tiny top up on living wages, or a tiny top up on child poverty payments or something. We've been trained to celebrate that. We've been trained to celebrate patting ourselves on the back when we redistribute. And a wellbeing economy is about asking, why did we allow the gap between rich and poor to open up so much in the first place? Why are we allowing so much damage to be done in the first place? And asking the economy to do more of the heavy lifting in delivering good lives for people first time around. So it's a profound shift. I think Scotland is, and I work with one foot in a global organisation, and tell you what, all eyes are on Scotland. The wellbeing economy movement across the globe is really excited by some of the changes that are happening here. They're excited by the conversation, certainly excited to see the rhetoric and the use of the term wellbeing economy. What they're now waiting for is to see how does this translate into practical, not just action, but practical change that makes a real difference to communities in Scotland. So now is the time for Scotland to really deliver a wellbeing economy and not just talk about it. That's the next stage. It's good we've been talking about it. The next stage is to deliver it. And I think this third sector is vital in that. As Ben said, partly because you embody so much of those values that are central to a wellbeing economy. You already walk the talk. And so that's vital. But I think there's also something about holding the gaze on what I describe as the 2 SCs of wellbeing. The 1 SC is survival and coping. And that's meeting people's urgent needs now. That's a humanitarian response to a very inhumane economic system. But the other strength of this third sector, and that's where the sector's at its campaigning, ambitious, boldest best, that is saying survival and coping is not good enough. We need to focus on system change as well. So both those dual roles are really, really vital in building a wellbeing economy.
Thank you very much, Katherine. That's really helpful. Before this event, some of us within SCVO were talking about the fact that it's really complicated what a wellbeing economy is. And it's difficult to know how the third sector fits into that. That's a really helpful explanation. But Anna, what do you think, from talking to people in the third sector and from your overview of the third sector is really going to need to contribute to this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Katherine and Ben are right that the sector is, in a way, has values at its heart, and much of the sector contributes already to things like sustainability and the environment. But the sector is so diverse that it's got lots and lots of different roles to play, and some of it is that immediate humanitarian response and crisis management, which really ideally we shouldn't need to be involved in. We should get to that point, and that's where you sometimes hear people saying we exist to put ourselves out of business. I think that's true for some organisations, and homelessness would be a classic example of that. Climate change probably another example of that. However, we also have vast parts of the sector that contribute just to social well-being and to the economy, the hard economy as well. So the things like arts and sports and heritage organisations, youth work, a whole lot of different parts of the sector all contribute to well-being and absolutely shouldn't disappear if the world was a good place. We make it better. Social enterprise being a classic example in this context. So I think the sector has a really important role, and it needs to be treated with parity of esteem, and that really appreciated at all levels in Scottish society.
Thanks very much, Anna. Before we go on to start our Q&A element of this webinar, we're just going to ask the first poll question. So we are asking, do you think COVID-19 and lockdown makes the creation of a wellbeing economy in Scotland more likely? And perhaps you want to base your answers a little bit on some of the things that the Minister and Katherine and Anna have said this morning. Please go ahead and answer now. So we are seeing 79% of people say yes, which is excellent. Well, it'll be interesting to see as we go through this discussion whether we come up with some ideas for how people within the third sector and organisations can actually contribute to this in a very practical sense. So I'm going to start off actually with a question that somebody asked me to ask, somebody who couldn't come attend this webinar asked me to ask Katherine, which you sort of answered, but I think probably there's a little bit of confusion around. So this was a private sector contact who was pointing out that all of our pensions, or most of our pensions, are dependent on economic growth. So where does economic growth fit into a well-being economy? And if we're moving away from economic growth, what happens to our pensions?
This is one of the questions that keeps me awake at night, because I don't have the answer yet, and I would love to think through this with people a lot smarter than me, because it is one of the examples of just the extent to which so many of our institutions and our systems are geared up and dependent on economic growth. So it's a bit like having a petrol car. When you run out of petrol, that's not a good thing. You're stuck. And I think until we completely decouple living standards and livelihoods in old age from pensions, and hence their dependency on PLCs, which, if you think about it, are inequality exacerbating machines, then they are designed to transfer wealth to those who have already got rents. They're rent creating machines. So we need to figure out a way to ensure that people are not worried about their livelihoods in old age. So I don't have a really easy answer for that one, because it's one of those chestnuts that I really puzzle over. I think there are exciting mechanisms of support. Well, universal basic services is one good example, and this is where Scotland is ahead of other countries. I mean, we do provide a lot of services via this idea of the social wage that other countries do not provide as a matter of course for everyone. But there's also questions around how can we support capital raising mechanisms for businesses beyond the stock market, so crowdfunding, sort of community funding for support for social enterprises, those sorts of mechanisms as well, so we can move away from the stock market and the pensions that are dependent on them. But Susan, I would love to chat to your colleague there who asked that question, because this is something I really wrestle with and I don't have a good answer yet, but it's something we have to nail and unpick if we're going to have a chance at moving away from the dominance of the PLC, the power it creates, and the extent to which PLCs are set up in a way, one, to exacerbate inequality, but also turn a blind eye to damage to the environment, think short term, don't think about social benefit and so on. We need to have an economic ecosystem in Scotland that's not just about PLCs. It's got a much higher percentage of co-ops, social enterprises that Ben's already talked about. That is the economic ecosystem that will create a wellbeing economy, not one that's dominated by extractive institutions.
Thank you very much. That was a very honest answer. I'm not going to ask you the same question, Minister, don't worry. What I did want to ask is, you've mentioned the Scottish Government's advisory group on economic recovery and the fact that a wellbeing economy is central to the National Performance Framework and the Programme for Government. But I did notice that the Economic Recovery Report suggested the creation of a wellbeing economy framework. And I'm just wondering, if Scotland is really committed to a wellbeing economy, why does it need another framework rather than the National Performance Framework? And isn't that just adding a whole extra layer of bureaucracy when actually one thing should be enough?
Thank you. I think the question is, of course, that the National Performance Framework, as you'll know, is based on the SDGs, and that wider consideration of how we live up both internally and externally to making our contribution to sustainable development goals. The focus on within the report is, how do we then evolve some of that thinking into what actions can we take to support the wellbeing economy over and above and in synergy with our commitment to the SDGs. And that is about evolving our considerations of how we meet the different targets of the wellbeing economy, and what essentially gets to the heart of some of our discussion today around the ethos of what is a wellbeing economy, and how do we measure that, and actually getting into the substance of both what Katherine said around what is the good society, and what one of the questioners has asked Gregor Muir around what is quality of life, what is the good life, and of course those questions have been going on since the times of Aristotle and well beyond there, and from different facets. And we need to really conceptualize through the new set of measurements what a well-being economy is here in Scotland, and how do we deliver it, and how do we deliver it with the devolved responsibilities that we have. And actually, if I may just touch on the previous question, because I think it was a really important one around pensions, and I used to work in pensions, and it's something that I think about a lot. What are the considerations around what does the good life and a caring society look like for older people will be one of the big questions that comes out of this crisis, and pensions is part of that. But also, pension investment can be green. And I don't think we should, yes, some of it has historically not been, but there's plenty of scope for that movement to happen. And actually one of the ways that we're leading on that in Scotland is providing incentives for investors to invest in a low carbon economy. And of course, Fiona Hislop inviting investors to get behind more than 1 billion of low carbon, eco-friendly and recycling investment opportunities in Scotland last week. So that's about how do we encourage those large pension investors to make good investment decisions for the planet, but also for the development of the Scottish economy in a sustainable way. So we're already thinking in those terms, and how do we incentivise that through government initiative. But there will be much more required, and that will need to come.
Thank you very much. Anna, I'm just going to pick up on Gregor Muir's question that the Minister referred to here, because it also asks, how will the voluntary sector play a role in the move to a wellbeing economy? So can the sector help define what that is? So a number of questions have come up about funding and the need for longer term funding, which was also set up out in the Scottish Government's Economic Advisory Group report. But I think Gregor's question suggests that people in the third sector want to know more than just funding, how they can contribute to change. So given what the Minister and Katherine have said, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think obviously funding's a huge issue for everybody all the time in the sector. It's one of those things. But I think that the sector is already making a huge contribution to a wellbeing economy. The sector makes a contribution to a traditional economy, but we're also doing a lot to advance wellbeing in our society. So I think it would be good to be more on the front foot and to be able to define our offer, to refine our offer, and work out where we can add most value, and that will be across a huge range of different things. All different parts of the sector contribute in different ways, and I think there's a really interesting tension between what is the right thing at a global level and what do individual people feel is the right thing in their communities. Because if you start saying to somebody, what does a good life mean to you? Most people on this call, I guess, will talk about greenness, will talk about, a healthy planet for their children's future. There will be people that I will meet at the bus stop, or maybe not because they'll be in a car, who will say, what's a good life for me is getting to go on 4 foreign holidays a year and having lots of stuff in my house. So there's something about I'm sorry to be a bit, I don't know, layman about it, but I do think there's something about the public debate, and the public debate really engaging in what matters. So I'm a big believer, evangelist for even the NPF, the National Performance Framework. I think Scotland's really, as Katherine said, leading the way with our rhetoric, lots of the policy stuff. But in terms of day-to-day action, we really need to help people understand what their contribution is and how why it's important and why it matters.
Thanks very much. I'm just going to pick up on the funding question. There are a number of funders in the audience. And Foundation Scotland have asked specifically, how can third sector funders best support the development of a wellbeing economy? So we know it's not all about funding, but what should funders be doing?
Well, there's a bit about what they shouldn't be doing, probably. So there's sustainability and that thinking about the long term, but it's also about actually judging contributions on outcomes and not all on outputs and inputs, and looking at the long-term contribution and not just being ticking a box about how many people have you got through a process or how many events have you held, you know, those kind of ticky box things. It's actually looking at what this is as a collective responsibility, where the funder sits alongside the funded, and let's redefine that relationship, because that's immediately passive. There needs to be something about it being a partnership and a collective use of resources for the good of X, whatever that might be. So I would say make it more of a partnership, more about relationship, and we have seen that coming through in the COVID response. I would really like to see that sustained, and much less about counting stuff.
And Minister, there's been a lot of rhetoric from the Scottish Government over the last 10 years about the need for longer term funding for voluntary organisations and trusting in voluntary organisations to make the best use of their money. As Anna says, that some of the emergency funding that came through to the sector in response to COVID has shown that, but the reality is the vast majority of voluntary organisations and communities across Scotland are still dealing with short-term funding from local authorities and health boards and other funders. What more can the Scottish Government do to actually make this finally happen, make the reality of 5 and 10 year funding arrangements a reality?
That's such an important question, and one that we think about a lot. And of course, it's the source of the challenge is in the fiscal framework and the budget process for the United Kingdom as a whole, in that it's been many years now since the UK government did a spending review and a long-term position with regard to establish a long-term position with regard to consequential funding. So we are constantly in a cyclical scenario where we have to set the Scottish budget in a short time period based on the amount of consequentials that we are able to understand are going to be forthcoming from Treasury. So, you know, for example, the budget process that we had this year, where the UK government didn't pass their budget until the early spring, and then we had to pass ours very quickly thereafter, was, you know, it was about as far away from an ideal scenario as you could get. And then, you know, we're already hearing rumours that there may be a budget delay at Westminster this year, which will delay our whole process again, which then delays the whole process for local authorities who legally have to set budgets before the financial year. So where we can consider more longer term arrangements, and where we can provide financial direction and strategy for the country as a whole, we are seeking to do that, and we'll be saying more about that in the coming months. But fundamentally, under the current arrangement, the big challenge is that we live in this cycle from a fiscal position for the UK, where we're only clear on what Barnett consequentials we are going to receive in the budget position for the Scottish Government at an increasingly later stage on a year-by-year basis, and that makes the challenge for all of us more difficult and the repercussions more widespread. So I'm sorry that's not a very optimistic answer, but it's an honest one, in that we continue to, until this position changes at a UK level, it's always going to be challenging for us to set more longer term positions, although we will endeavour to try.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move the questions on to more practical things. Again, Brock Luke has submitted a question about practical things that need to happen, and it makes me think about some of the pre-submitted questions. So one of those, Katherine, is that the coronavirus pandemic has had a major impact on high streets, obviously, we've seen that, which were already in a state of decline, and the shift to online buying is not really likely to turn around and go back. In Dumfries, the community group Mid-Steeple Quarter has taken on a number of high street stores and is renovating those and repurposing them for community benefit. They're asking what elements of a wellbeing economy can help contribute to more successful town centres.
Just what they're doing, and that sounds amazing in Dumfries. I'd love to learn more about it. But it's about taking ownership of physical stock and repurposing it for what community needs. But two, there's something more about that. It's about people working together and collectively and creating some presence where people can come together and be community and build community. So I think that, I mean, that's a brilliant example. I'd love to learn more. If anyone can put a link in the chat to anything where we can find out more information, that would be fantastic. I think the shift to online is a really interesting one, because while it has sort of exacerbated market concentration of, our friends like, Jeff Bezos' company, but we can also see how it's enabled smaller enterprises to flourish as well, whether they're based remotely, they can sell across the UK and beyond. I buy veg boxes from the wonderful Linwood community that I order that all online. I've been buying local skincare from someone up in the Highlands, this beautiful vegan face cream and hand cream. So that it's not all bad. And of course, there is alternatives to the Amazons of the world. There's this wonderful initiative, Hive, that links up local bookstores. So it's not as black and white. And I think it just takes a bit of time to be able to dig out those local providers that are able to sell online and sort of make sure that we're those of us who are lucky enough, and I will recognize that's a really fortunate position to be able to have some discretionary spending, but to use that in the direction that supports stores that are just around the corner or up in the Highlands. That's vital. I want to just, if I can, just reflect on the funding question, because can't just be about budget spend, because so much of that is often directed into downstream urgent need. I think if we're really serious about creating a wellbeing economy, we need to think about shifts of power, and that's questions of regulation and decision making and voice and democracy. So we can't just sort of put all the onus, and I say this as someone who's working on a project about a wellbeing budget right now, but it's not just about budgets and spend. It's about how do we actually reduce the need for some of that spending in the first place, and so we don't need to just rely on those annual spending reviews. And I think for Foundation Scotland, I've been speaking to them about this, about the role of funders, third sector funders in creating a wellbeing economy. There is a challenge about going beyond, as Anna was saying really well, about we're so trained into counting outputs, and it's easy to count X number of food parcels handed out. It's a lot harder to figure out what is our contribution to reducing the demand for food parcels. And so funders have got to go through a bit of a mindset change as well, reconfigure what they see as success that they're expecting from the partners that they work with, and how they describe their contribution to system change. And there are some funders who are grappling with it. I don't think there's a standout one that's nailed it yet, but I think there is a bit of a journey that foundations need to go on as well, if they're to support the sort of work that moves us away from just priding ourselves on putting a sticking plaster on damage that's being done, to really think about how to reshape the economic system and the way we do power and democracy into society. And funders have got to be there, and that they have to have a different way of understanding the attribution and contribution question in that.
Yeah, good. It sounds like what you're talking about is funders really need to trust voluntary organisations, that they are well run, that they're well governed, that they understand the communities in which they operate in.
Well, and it's hard to be a well-run organisation when you're going from year to year cycle, and you're constantly having to re-recruit staff and redo another strategy, just dependent on what funds you get. So often those funding cycles undermine the ability of third sector organisations to look long-term, to plan, to really focus on a multi-year project. And this is a multi-year task. It's not just about 1 year set of a couple of nice programs. I often talk about it as thousand piece jigsaw puzzle, that all those changes at all levels of the system, whether it's our measures of progress to how we design towns, to how we do our transport infrastructure, to how we set up businesses, to how we go about local decision making, all of that we need to grapple with in the conversation around a wellbeing economy. And so I think if we're expecting organizations to have vision, but at the same time only going for 12-month cycles, if that, and then expecting them to report on that so frequently that they can't see the impact coming, that these things take time. So it is a new paradigm in funding as well.
Thank you, Katherine. I think that's a very welcome message to people at this webinar. Minister, just following up on the stuff about high streets as well, we've had a couple of questions about the 20-minute neighbourhood idea that the First Minister mentioned in their programme for government. Is that just a nice idea, or is that something that can really play a part in this agenda?
It's absolutely more than a nice idea. It's about how do we set in a vision, particularly for urban environments, of a low carbon future where transport connectivity is available and accessible and expedient in a way to make sure that people can access what they need quickly, but also making sure that our communities are brought together and planned in a way where people can access what they need through walking and cycling and methods of transport that are better for the environment and better for the individual and better for society as a whole. But I think it also gets to the heart of some of the questions that Katherine touched on around town centres and the nature of our public realm and how that is occupied and utilised for the next the way our society is going to look in a more digitised world, in a low carbon world, and in a world where well-being is emphasised more than it was in decades past. And it's an area of thinking that is absolutely front and foremost in my mind at the moment, around how, in a situation where the nature of both the way people use public space and the change to patterns of work, with considerations around the need for investments to pay things like pensions, which we were talking about earlier, how do we bring that all together in a way that's more beneficial to the common good and more socially beneficial approaches to commerce? But also, how do we make sure we do that in a way where we're not just facilitating or accepting high levels of unemployment? So it's how do we weigh that up together? And these are very hard questions that we're grappling with here in government at the moment, which relate to devolved competencies, but also wider economic considerations. But certainly, if you think of the model that we've had for many years until now of a situation where people were paying a lot of money for goods in an environment where people were low paid, which then created a high yield for investors, many of whom are in tax havens. We can't go on like that, and that needs to change. How much we in the Scottish Government will be able to affect that is something we're analysing at the moment, but certainly for the longer term, in all societies, I think we need to see this as an opportunity to yes, continue to be determined to create employment, but good living wage, fair work employment, but also how do we reimagine our public space in a new way, so that goods are accessible within 20 minutes and services are accessible within 20 minutes, but also that there's that wider sense of enrichment of good work and greater environmental enhancement of the urban environment in terms of reduced pollution, but also quality of design and use of space. I could talk about that for a long time. I think it's such a fascinating and important subject, and so key at the moment into how we move forward.
Yeah, that ties in very much with the next question, which I was going to ask, which was from One Parent Families Scotland, about practical measures that can be put in place to ensure a wellbeing economy places higher priority on family-friendly jobs and working practices. So obviously COVID has completely changed the way a lot of people are working, all of us here today, and taken us back into our local communities. So how's that going to tie in with the wellbeing economy, and what should be put in place to help that contribute to a wellbeing economy, Katherine?
A brilliant question around the role of jobs in a wellbeing economy and their suitability for other priorities. So one, I mean, Ben's already mentioned the quality of the job, living wages, and other dimensions of job quality like purpose and control and autonomy that really matter as well, and sufficiency of hours, but then not too many hours as well. And I think something that the Scottish Government could lean into a little bit more is around the shorter working week or the shared work agenda. I mean, we had this crazy sort of binary on the radio this morning where we had two pieces, one after the other. And the first one was around WASPy women not really wanting their retirement age to be extended. And then the piece afterwards was a young, incredibly smart 22-year-old young woman saying she's been applying for over 100 jobs and hasn't even got a job interview. Now there's a huge incoherence of, at the same time as raising the retirement age while young people are struggling to get into the labour market. I mean, it's just, and you know, even talk about jobs guarantees. We should support people who want to move out of the labour market, attending to their living standards, as we talked about earlier. And as I said, I don't have a brilliant answer for that one. But also we need to support distributing work much more fairly. I mean, I think there's a lot of us who are feeling we've been working way too many hours the last few months. And then there's a lot of folk who, of course, have had the employment rug pulled out from under their feet. We've got to find a ways to, one, be creative with job design, so we don't just fall into this trap of defining what a full-time job is, but really split up jobs differently so we can share them better. There is a tax question, and I understand that's not in the Scottish Government's competence, but if we could move the tax base away from labour or per head, but maybe to per hour work, and so that there's more incentives for businesses to get creative with perhaps more people being employed, but on fewer hours. Those sorts of questions really matter, let alone moving the tax base to wealth and environmental pollution. That's a bigger question perhaps. But I think how we design jobs and how we share the available work is going to be one of the massive questions we need to grapple with, because there won't be as much formal work in the market economy. But my goodness, there's a lot of work to do in our communities and in our society. So how do we enable people to attend to community work that they want to do, maybe Thursday, Friday afternoon, rather than working 12 hours every day, whether that's pay debts or put food on the table because they're working 3 or 4 jobs or so on. So we need to really grapple with that. And the Scottish Government does have a leadership role in sort of walking that talk. How does the public sector employ its staff? What does it expect of its supply chain? Those sorts of questions. So there is stuff that can be done now.
Brilliant, thank you very much. I cannot believe it's already 10 to 1, and I feel like we've barely touched on some of the issues here. But we do only have 10 minutes left, so we're going to introduce the second poll now, and then I'll ask all the participants to So, do you believe your organisation has an important role to play in creating a wellbeing economy? Yes, and we're ready to go. Yes, but we need more help to do so. I'm still not sure. Or no, this is not our business. Let's see what our participants have said. Half of organisations have said yes, and we're ready to go, and 43%, just under half, yes, but we need more help to do so. So I think that's really interesting. Basically, there's a major appetite within the voluntary sector to get involved in this agenda. Hopefully, this webinar has helped to clarify some of those issues for some people about how they can get involved, but they obviously still feel there's an awful lot more support that they potentially require from organisations like SCVO, funders, government, local government and national government to do so. So I think that's really interesting. So I'm now just going to ask each of our panelists to maybe just give a little bit of a sum up, and the questions that we really haven't got round to, there's an awful lot of questions about practical things. So maybe you could think about what bit of advice you would give to voluntary organisations that are keen to get involved in this right now to help play a part in it. And we'll start with the Minister.
Okay, thank you. There is so much we could say, and I hope we can come back and talk again. Really grateful to everyone for all your points and contributions. I think where I would like to centre in the end is something that I feel, not just from a ministerial perspective, but from my own thinking for many years now, is where the emphasis is in this, which is not just around the environment, but also I think fair work is almost the most crucial element here, because Katherine spoke very convincingly, I thought, around the need to distribute work and the need to make sure that it's good quality jobs, and to think about mechanisms in which we can encourage and enable, say for example, a 4-day working week and all the benefits that would bring to the individuals, and the less demand on public services and greater well-being overall. One of the biggest elements in all of that is the affordability of housing, because if you think about how high the costs are for rent and for home ownership, and how much that pressures people into the need to work more or longer hours or earn a certain level of resource, but also how much that pressure takes out of the local economy. The amount that people are fair enough, some of that comes through landlords into other aspects of the real economy or through the banking system in other ways. But actually, if we want to have that Keynesian real economy growth at a local level, more spending power will be beneficial, and obviously we want sustainable consumerism, but if it can help create that demand, then if we can reduce housing costs, or certainly just try and level it off to a greater extent, and get more of a balanced position as we move forward, I think that could make a tremendous difference. And that's obviously very challenging to achieve, but something that is going to be increasingly important, I think, in the years ahead, and why our commitment as a government to the affordable homes target is so important. But there's a collective effort to undertake there, yes, I think that the fair work agenda is absolutely fundamental to this. I could say a lot more, but I'll conclude there. And how you can continue to contribute. We are, of course, as a government, engaged internationally in the Wellbeing Economy WAGO group with New Zealand and Iceland, and potentially another European countries soon. We are grateful for all input. So if you want to input to me directly or through SCVO, grateful to hear any ideas or further feedback that you think might be helpful for us to know and learn about. I'll conclude there. Thank you very much, Susan.
Thank you very much, Minister. Anna, do you want to give us your final thoughts?
Yeah, so I think this has been really, really interesting, and I think a comment in the chat from Ian Finlay from Pass for All has kind of summed it up a bit for me. This is as much about behaviour change as it is about system change. So we really do need to change the systems, and we've all talked about that. But it needs every individual person to change their behaviour and to buy into it, and to understand what's important about this. So I would say, what the system needs to do is not get in the way of that behaviour change and do everything it can to support that behaviour change. And I think the sector has got a really big role to play with that. So thank you.
Thanks, Anna. And Katherine?
Yes, building on that, the more we change our behaviour, we more demonstrate the demand and the need for system change and the possibility of system change. And I do think there is a very key I guess, demonstration function of a lot of the activities going on within the third sector that's really set out in microcosm what a wellbeing economy can look like and demonstrate that it's feasible and it's desirable. I think the other behavior that people can do is just keep talking about this, keep talking about the interlinkages between these questions, keep talking about the links, as Ben was saying there, between work and work pressure and the housing market, keep understanding the links between how we judge the economy, what questions do we ask of the economy, how much is it really underpinning so many of the challenges that we're facing in our daily lives, and just keep that conversation going. My colleagues would kick me in the shins if I didn't say also one of the things you can do is join We All. Our mantra is if you want to transform the economy to make it more humane and more sustainable, and when you want to work with others to do so, then you're welcome. So everyone is welcome to join the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. There's also a We All Citizens platform for individuals as well. So just please do consider yourselves part of that movement. And as Ben identified, the Wellbeing Economy Governments Partnership is a really good vehicle for this sort of international conversations and collaborations between governments, where it's not party political orientated and it's not beggar thy neighbour diplomacy and trade negotiations that we see so much of. It is governments who have a sincere intent to try to put well-being at the heart of economic policy making, saying none of them have all the answers and they're wanting to look to each other to learn and to collaborate and to share. And so the more ideas that we can channel to those sorts of conversations, the better. So all the work you do through policy mechanisms, keep pushing that up to help go on this journey of continuous improvement, because we've got a long way to go still.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you all very much. Ben Macpherson, Katherine Trebeck and Anna Fowley for contributing to this event. It has been a really interesting discussion. I find all of this really fascinating. It kind of makes me wish I'd become an economist like Katherine. You're so inspiring, Katherine.
Way down the back of the sofa, my economics degree.
So thank you to everyone who submitted questions as well, and apologies we really just couldn't get through them all. We tried to get through the more important ones. But if you find this event quite inspiring as well, and think your organisation can contribute to this agenda and to Scotland's economic recovery, then do get in touch with SCVO. You can look at scvo.org.uk/Nevermore Needed to find out how you can link that in with the Nevermore Needed campaign. As I said at the start of this webinar, this webinar will be available online on the SCVO website after the event, so please do share it with any interested colleagues. So thank you again for attending, everyone, and we hope you have a good afternoon. Thank you.